What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Karnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, just slow clap for the first weekend of college football because we made it. We had a full slate of games Thursday to Monday. We're recording this on Tuesday. Full slate of games, excellent matchups, excellent football, big upsets, games on campuses, everything you love about college football. I feel like we got it all this weekend on a very hefty slate. It makes it worth the wait to get a weekend like that for the opening weekend of college football.
Absolutely. This was, chef's kiss, just an awesome weekend. You had big upsets, you had big time matchups, you had good games. There were very few blowouts except for Monday night, really. So I feel like all the ones that we really wanted there to be a good game, it was a game to the fourth quarter. So definitely something we needed to experience. So awesome pageantry. This is one of the best weekends of the year, man. Opening weekend college football, Labor Day weekend.
One of my favorite for sure. Let's dive in, man. We've got our regular season shows rolling now. Now I can talk about real football as we head into our first quarter of our show. Daniel, what's one thing you learned this weekend?
One thing I learned is that Florida State can beat anyone if they play their A-plus game. So that kind of, will eventually lead into one of my questions. But a lot of people want to square this Alabama-Florida State game, only one-sidedly about, hey, this is an Alabama issue, which, hey, that's absolutely fair. I just also want to make sure we give love to Florida State. I think when they play their A-plus game, specifically this year's team, I think that they can compete with anyone in the country. Now, I do think that there's several teams that if they play their A-plus game against, those teams will need to not play their A-plus game. So there is a little caveat there. I did kind of have a little backdoor, a little magician's trick. But Florida State is one of those teams that, because of the scheme, we've seen this before with Malzahn, early in a career, with him having his first season at Florida State might be his best season at Florida State. We've seen that at Auburn. We've seen that, when he's gone around, at UCF, when he was working his way up through Arkansas State, these other places. He's a guy who, as teams around figure him out, he becomes less effective. He certainly can raise the floor. But this year, I do think that they are in for some surprises for some teams. They put some stuff on tape that I think is going to really annoy some people, and they've got the perfect QB to execute what Gus Malzahn wants to do. So big props to Florida State. I definitely think that they are a contender this year. And yes, it is self-serving because I did put them in the ACC championship myself in our season preview. I still feel like they're in that realm. I also picked against them in our first week. So a little slap on the hand for that, but I'll forgive myself since I was right about them maybe for the long term this year.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head of that game. You can take two sides, and that's why, which I'll get to my point in a minute, but is Alabama fine and Florida State should be considered a national title contender? Or, is the dynasty dead, as some people are saying, which I've got another point on here in a second. Daniel, the one thing I learned, and this will be a kind of a bow on the first week of college football, there will never be another Lee Corso. And Saturday, this is not necessarily game related, but we get the end of an era at ESPN. Yeah, slow clap. College game day is something that you, I, and a bunch of other college football fans have grown up on. I was born in 96. So for my whole life, I've watched Corso put on the headgear, and it is the culmination of a college football Saturday morning. Is like you have all these morning shows and you have college game day building to this one moment where some old dude, holding a pencil and screaming at kids and maybe saying stuff he shouldn't on TV in Houston, puts on the head of a mascot while wearing a suit, or sometimes full gear that he wears. Yeah, end of an era. College game day changed and created this new space of a game day show. And Lee Corso helped build that. And I thought that Josh Pate made a really good point of just some good life stuff you can learn from Corso, which is after having played college football and then coached college football for 3 or 4 decades, What if you had told Lee Corso, hey, the most impact you're going to have on the sport is still yet to come, even though you're already old? Say old, above 40, right? Above 50.
Right.
That's incredible, in that you can still have a large impact even later on in life. And so the one thing I learned, Daniel, is there's never going to be another Lee Corso. Hats off. I thought they did a really good job on College Game Day, giving him a proper send off, doing it at midfield with Brutus. I don't know if you saw the video. They actually gifted him the original Brutus head that he put on in 1996. They gifted that to him. So I hope that finds a proper spot
So awesome.
in his house. Yeah, shout out to Lee Corso. There will never be another one. And I'm glad that ESPN is not going to try to replicate anyone putting on a mascot head. I'm glad that as Lee leaves and retires, I'm glad that retires with him, because he's a legend. That's deserved. Thank you, Lee Corso.
Yeah, man. Just to echo what you're saying, I agree completely. One of the things about college football is just the love of the game and just loving ball. And I think Corso embodies that. There's too many stiff people in suits who talked like it was a 9 to 5 job. And he really brought the fun back into previews and stuff. And a lot of people just think about him, in these later years of just him being this old, you know, silly old man kind of a thing, but your silly grandpa. But that's like, man, all of the whole decade of the 90s and those, especially those early 2000s, man. I mean, he was electric. And I mean, Kirk definitely helped him through these last few years as far as making the point he was trying to make and making sure he remembered where he was with, what game they were talking about and all that kind of stuff, as you would with any elderly, parent or grandparent. But I just admire him, admire how they did it. I mean, just the whole thing is supposed to be fun. There's pageantry around it. And I feel like they hit the nail on the head for all these many years. So awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
And we know, like, the best parts about college football are the pageantry, the traditions, the rivalries. And like Lee Corso and College Game Day embodied this, the pageantry and tradition of college football. And he accidentally started a tradition by, again, trying to be fun. And what if with my pick, I put on the mascot's head? It doesn't sound crazy now, but if no one had ever done it, just putting on the mascot's head is crazy, but it's fun. So shout out to Lee, end of an era. Saturdays would not be the same without Lee Corso, but glad he got a proper send off from College Game Day. Daniel, as we head into the second quarter of our show, 2 questions we have moving forward. Daniel, what's the first question you've got after watching college football in week 1?
Yeah, after throwing all those flowers that we just did, here's some darts. Okay, is this the new normal for Alabama? Is this what we should expect? I'm not saying just losing a game. I'm saying them looking human. Like, is there now kryptonite in the room? Is there something that they can't, overcome? They're 5-5 in their last 10 games. 4 unranked losses in the last 14 games. It took Saban, whatever the stat is, 16 years to have 4 unranked
235
losses.
games.
Yeah. So, like, not only are they human, are they're beatable in the sense that, anyone can kind of have their day. Great article by Chris Marler this week at louisianasports.net, just about, of course he's being a little hyperbolic with the dynasty being dead, but he provides some great evidence. And Marler is a lifelong Alabama fan, so this isn't like a slanderous article. It's more like a introspective piece. So I definitely recommend that. But him talking specifically about the high of beating Georgia last year and basically the fan base thinking, did we just get another Nick Saban? Which sounds just so crazy to think in hindsight, because the very next week they lost for the first time in 40 years to Vanderbilt, which, they could still beat Georgia this year. They could still do these other things. They could, win big games. This is only one game. We have a lot of overreactions, but it does beg the question. Like, there was a lot last year that kind of caused, consternation. And to start the year like this, I mean, Saban would not have let that fly. I know it's always going to be unfair comparing Saban to anybody, because that's just unfair, the greatest of all time. But someone's got to do it. Someone's got to follow him, and DeBoer so far has been tasked with being that guy. And I kind of feel like this may be the new normal. He's an outsider of the SEC. He's here. People are already searching his buyout at this point. So, yeah, I'm wondering if this is what we're going to see going forward.
Yeah, I'll go to my. I was going to save my for a second question, but my first question, Daniel, is what week one overreaction will turn out to be true? Week one is the perfect week to have overreactions because you get a 1 game sample size, and you make an opinion based off of what you thought both teams were, right? So Florida State Alabama is a perfect example of this in a vacuum of like, well, we thought Florida State coming off a 2-10. Well, let me rephrase that. I thought Florida State coming off a 2-10 season was going to be a 6-6 type team. Alabama goes on the road, not only loses as a 14-point favorite, but like gets beat by 14, whatever the final score was. So it's, well, is the dynasty dead? Some other popular overreactions from this week. Clemson, not a national title contender. Florida State, back. Arch Manning, dead, overrated. Ohio State, best team in the country. LSU should be SEC and national title favorite. Matt Patricia, Broyles Award winner. Miami, front runner of the ACC. Tulane to the college football playoff. Belichick and UNC will not make a bowl game. Utah or Iowa State should be Big 12 favorites. In there, Daniel, are probably several overreactions to week one. But which of these is going to be true? Which of these are we going to look back on and say, actually, that turned out not to be an overreaction, and that was a good read out of week one, or a good guess out of week one. You talk about Bama. Bama is definitely one of those of, I'm sitting here scratching my head. I thought Bill Connolly made a good point. We talked about this in the offseason, Daniel, of last year, Georgia and Texas had higher floors than Alabama, and Alabama had a higher ceiling. And that's one thing that Saban did so well, was the floor was always so high at Alabama that, I mean, honestly, in a year that we would say is a rebuilding year for Alabama, they go and win the SEC and come up short in the national championship game against Georgia in 2021. Same thing, 2023, not their best team. They go and beat Georgia undefeated in the SEC championship, go to the playoff, come up short against Michigan. It seems like Bama has lost the floor that Saban brought. And I think they still have the ceiling of, like, if they go and beat Georgia in here in 3 weeks, it's not going to surprise me. I think the more surprising thing is that the floor is now gone from Alabama. And maybe that's my reaction, or my Bama take watching it for the last year in a game, is the floor is much lower without Nick Saban. And maybe that was his greatest strength.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something to consider with the article I mentioned that Marler wrote was a lot about doing the little things well and beating unranked teams, and 124-4 all time against unranked teams. Like,
yeah,
you just do what you're supposed to do all the time and then be ready for the big moments. And if you're 50-50 on those top 5 matchups, then, you're going to be in a good position more often than not.
Yeah.
Just make sure you handle your business elsewhere. So that's a good point.
What's your second question?
Second question, I did go to the big game of the weekend, the big noon kickoff. Dude, is Ohio State better defensively than they were last year? And they had a great defense last year, and that was my big knock on them coming into this year. I was like, you know what? They lost their defensive coordinator, Tim Knowles, in a lateral move to Penn State. Downgrade. But is that what are they doing, to have lost him and all the NFL talent, and even just the senior-laden leadership, like some guys that have just been around for a while? You lose all of that. You wonder, can they handle it? And then they go toe-to-toe with Steve Sarkisian, Arch Manning, who I don't think is dead, by the way. I do think that he's going to be just fine. Obviously, my career depends on it because I picked him to win the national championship. But that being said, I think they're going to get things figured out, and I think people are going to look back at this week and think, wow, we really did see 2 of the very best teams play. And defensively, I have no questions about Texas. I think they played great defensively. And obviously, there were several stops inside the red zone for Ohio State and really bowing up on short yardage. So I feel really strongly about their defensive front. Matt Patricia, you mentioned the overreaction of Broyles Award, but I mean, him showing versatility, being able to come in to college after being gone for so long and to be able to coach these types of players and get them ready to play, such a elite team to start with, an elite scheme, and really they never really looked out of position. They were, they had a guy everywhere they were supposed to, so they look schematically sound. They've obviously always got players, and big moments, dude. Fourth down, goal line, they showed up. Only gave up 7 points, and that was, I don't want to call it garbage time. They were up 14-0, and Arch was just throwing for the end zone at that point. It kind of loosened them up a little bit, but yeah, if they play this kind of defense in the Big Ten, they're going to have several games where they don't allow a touchdown.
Well, now that you've won week 1, your defense is a high enough floor, right, to give your offense time to get up to speed with your new quarterback, to get up to speed. I'm curious there. And again, this is why I'm like, I look at week 1 and I go, let's see how this plays out, because, Texas outgained Ohio State by over 130 yards. They had 5 more first downs than Ohio State did. They were better on third down. They both had 1 fourth down conversion. Ohio State beat them in time possession. I mean, like EPA wise, they were both bad in the game. And again, like defensive battle. This plays into my second question, actually, which is, Daniel, has there been a defensive resurgence in college football? Or are we in the middle of a defensive resurgence in college football? I look at the biggest games of the weekend: Ohio State, Texas, 21 total points. LSU, Clemson, 27 total points. You could argue that should have been probably a touchdown better for LSU. Florida State, Bama, 48 points, which was above the over-under, but Florida State's defense played a lot better than anticipated. Mm-hmm. Like the winners played really, really good defense this weekend. You look at the last 3 teams that have won national championships, all led with their defense in Georgia, Michigan, and Ohio State. Like that was the best unit on those teams. I just think like we get through the 2019 and 2020 Alabama teams, and we're at this like this offense is the height of the sport. It's the best it's ever been. You need a big quarterback and amazing wide receivers. I remember Kirby Smart before the Clemson game in 2020, or after the Clemson game in 2021 was like, people say you can't hold people to under 20 points a game. And he's like, we just don't believe that. And they held people to under 10 points a game that year. And you saw unbelievable defenses through Michigan and Ohio State with national champions. So are we in the middle of a defensive resurgence in college football? Well, we're 1 week in, but that's my question I have moving forward.
Yeah, just one comment I'll make on just week 1 as a whole. I had mentioned this to one of my friends who was just kind of like ready to have these overreactions. And obviously they're fun. This is what college football is all about, is like we finally got some, actual games. So we're, just going to throw out everything we knew from before the season. It's like, okay, hold on. Because last week I mentioned that was the only week we're going to have where we don't have any game data, really. You're going to be picking games solely based off of preseason prediction. Now you add 1 game of data plus all the preseason prediction, and slowly you start weighting, the in-season product versus any of your preconceived notions prior to the season. So we're about to, talk about halftime our XPR, but it's just one of those things I wanted to comment on. Like week 1 is the most volatile because you still know the least and you still thought you knew the most. And so it's like that weird, change of like, you start questioning everything you once knew, and you don't have any solid ground to stand on where you can say, oh no, they've played multiple games now and we've seen a trend. It's 1 game. It could have legitimately just been a matchup thing with Florida State and with this scheme, and they caught something that, maybe we don't even see the rest of the year with Alabama. That could be the case. It also could be that, maybe Alabama is less than what we thought, all this kind of stuff. But I do, I want to react appropriately, but we're going to see as these next couple weeks happen. Okay, we have a little bit of a read, but that's the beauty of college football, man. It's unpredictable. It always will be. So I love that.
I love it. Daniel, I wanted to mention, if you had blindly bet the under last week in every game, 65% against the number there, if you had blindly bet the under. So maybe a defensive resurgence. As we get here to halftime, we finally got our updated XPR, first one of the season. Follow us on social media at the Extra Point Pod, or Daniel and I will post this to Twitter here in just a second. At Deep South Daniel for Daniel, at Jacob Karnes of the K for me. All of that linked here in the episode description. Daniel, our extra point rankings, if you're new around here, or if you'd like a refresher, we aim for this short and sweet to be like the BCS, right? So we've incorporated both cold hard computers, cold hard data, as well as some human element to rank these teams. A lot of movement this week, which I appreciate and enjoy, because there should be a lot of movement after we get a week full of games. I'll caution you, there's some stuff that I don't agree with. There's some stuff that Daniel doesn't agree with, not just our numbers, computer rankings in here as well. Top 5, Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, LSU, and Penn State. Daniel, what teams stick out on here? What surprises? Who's overrated? Who's underrated? Where does the AP have wrong? What are your thoughts on our week 2 XPR?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, first off, Alabama, they were not top 5 for us. They're outside the top 10 now. I think that's, about right. I know that some of the other preseason or the AP and coaches had them lower, so that's kind of surprising. But I like that a team like Notre Dame did not drop far for their loss to Miami, but rather Miami moved up, because I do think that was a very even game, and especially that Notre Dame kind of didn't catch a couple breaks and then had to kind of fight and claw back in. But I was very impressed with Miami. So seeing them jump from 12 up to 8 for us, I think that's good. And then it's kind of funny. Michigan wins the game. They started out at 10 for us and then dropped down to 18. I know their metrics are probably off based on how they beat New Mexico. So, just some things I'm keeping an eye on. A team wins a game, drops 8 spots in the poll. So that shows you that there's other things weighted in here other than just perception and all this kind of stuff. It is reliant upon some of the different metrics that we use. So, this thing will be kind of fluid a few weeks, I think, where it really moves. And then we'll kind of have that strong sense of, what the data analytics part shows, and we'll probably have kind of an even onesie twosie swaps from here on out.
Yeah, man, I love our system. I'll tell you a team that we are more right on than the AP is Utah. I think that Utah. This is just my personal thoughts. Right now, I'd pick Utah to be my Big 12 favorite. After watching them play, that new quarterback's unbelievable. The defense looked vintage Utah. Just dominated UCLA on the road, which I don't think they're going to be very good, but the way they played was very Kyle Whittingham saying, everybody talking about these other teams in the Big 12, but we're still Utah. We're still going to be the standard, and maybe he goes out on top and retires this year. Alabama is still too high, I think, even for our numbers. I know that you and I personally ranked Florida State ahead of Alabama, as we should have. But again, this is BCS like in that if and this is 1 week of data. This is why we don't make a playoff after 1 week or pick teams to be in a championship after 1 week. As we get more data, this is going to be stronger and stronger each week. And look, if Bama starts winning again, they're probably going to move only up from here. If they start losing more, they're only going to move down from here. And same with Florida State or any of these other teams. I do find it interesting. Oklahoma above Michigan. That was not the case last week. Of course, we're going to talk about that game here in just a few minutes. Auburn, I wanted to call out. We have at 21 in our XPR. They're unranked in the AP, and they received less votes than last week, despite going on the road and stomping. Baylor, I think that's a little bit ridiculous. Couple of AP stats from the Bear, Chris Felica. One, it's the first time since the preseason poll of 2006 that we've got Florida, Florida State, and Miami in the top 15 of the AP poll, which is nuts. We've got them all in the top 20 of our XPR, and it's the first time since November 2013 both Clemson and South Carolina are in the top 10 of the AP poll. We've got them both in the top 15. So a resurgence in Florida and South Carolina in both the AP and the XPR. But keep an eye out for this on social media. Again, the goal is for this to look like the BCS, which I think is the best ranking system we've had. It was cold, hard data that was public that you could look at and watch. You can disagree with it, but it wasn't made behind closed doors by decision makers. People had to put their name on the human side of it, and the computer spat out their raw data. So, man, miss you, BCS. We're going to try to resurrect you with our XPR here. Daniel, third quarter of our show. What are 3 games we're not picking that you're excited to watch this weekend?
Yeah, this one, man, it hurts my heart. Last week, Kennesaw State loses to Wake Forest. It was a 1-point loss, and Kennesaw State missed a field goal and an extra point. So should have had the game. They definitely surprised some folks. It also could be that Wake was terrible. Probably a mix of both. Kennesaw State's a little better than they've been. That being said, dude, Kurt Signetti at Indiana talking a big game about the SEC and their scheduling, and he plays Kennesaw State, which again I'm not going to put Kennesaw State in every week, but they're on TV the first 2 weeks of the season, so bear with me, everybody. We're going to watch them. They're playing on Fox Sports 1, FS1 at noon. It's a 36.5-point line, and I'm going to take the points is all I'm saying. So Kennesaw State going to go in and they're not going to win this game, I wouldn't imagine, but they're definitely going to play well. It looks like a new day with new leadership and everything at Kennesaw State, but I'm going to watch that one. The second one, I'm going to say we were talking about this one because, me and you were pretty set on at least 2 games to pick. And then the other ones, there's a big grouping of others that we were deciding between. This one, we left off because it's just not quite as good as the other ones, but Ole Miss is going to Kentucky. And last year it wasn't really on our radar because, Kentucky stunk and Ole Miss was really good. We were like, dude, Ole Miss is going to kill them. And then sure enough, Kentucky handled them in Oxford. So now they play the return trip at Kentucky. Ole Miss is a 9.5-point favorite. I'm just watching for weird stuff. I would still lean Ole Miss to cover. I still think that Kentucky's lousy. That's what they showed us in the first week. We will see. But who knows, man? SEC football can get weird, especially when you're playing a team that by all accounts looks like they don't even have a pulse. Is this the Zach Calzada redemption story? He's, the most recent, 7th-year quarterback to be playing. So we'll see. Last one that I'm watching, I think this one's probably the most interesting because I feel like we're going to get a good read on both teams. South Florida at the Swamp, only 17.5-point line. South Florida with the beatdown of Boise State to start the year. That was impressive on that Thursday night. And they definitely look like they're an improved team. They've got some great transfers in there that I think they're really going to, be a tough out for anybody. And Florida, obviously, they're number 10 in our XPR. We expect them to have a pretty good season. They need this win because their schedule is very tough, so they can't lose anything like this. It's at the Swamp. I expect them to win, but keep an eye on it. It might be a good barometer of like, hey, how good is Florida? If Florida handles South Florida pretty good, beat them by 20-plus points, maybe Florida's a little better than we expect. And then on the flip side, like, hey, if South Florida makes this a game and keeps it close, maybe Florida is a little bit overrated this year. So something to keep an eye on there in the Swamp.
I love it. Those are 3 games I'll have my eye on as well, Daniel. For my third quarter, 3 uniform matchups I've got my eye on. First, I want to award our week 1 uniform matchup of the week. Goes to Ohio State versus Texas. Elite, no notes, perfection. For this week, 3 games, 3 matchups for uniforms I got my eye on. 1, Oklahoma, Michigan. Not a surprise. We're going to pick this game. Again, should be just a helmet game. 2 classic uniforms. Michigan, please wear Mace pants. Please. Please, please, please. Love Jacob. 2, BYU, Stanford. 2 very classy uniforms. I think BYU is scheduled to wear their royal blue helmet jersey over white pants. Stanford with the classic, just like cardinal red. Again, red versus blue. Good color matchup. Classy and simple. That should be a great one to watch. And lastly, Daniel, Oregon versus Oklahoma State. Oregon came out with the best combo they've had. Best combo, it would have beaten any combo last year. I love when Oregon uses the duck wings on the helmet. To me, it's like iconic Oregon, where you know exactly what team it is. Like that is their tradition, is to do that. That with a more classic uniform style they've worn the last couple of years looked really, really good. Excited to see what they've got this week on their what to wear calendar for the crowd. It says wear green. So I don't know if they're going to have a green unitard. Like Oregon hardly ever miss it with uniforms. They had some last year. Oklahoma State, of course, for the last few years have gone back to a more classic Barry Sanders era uniform. So that orange and black with the green and yellow should look really good on the field together. Excited to see those uniform matchups this week. Daniel, fourth quarter, we've made it. 4 games against the spread we're going to pick. Starting with at noon, we've got, an old. Were SMU and Baylor both in the Southwest Conference? They were, right?
I believe so. Yeah, it was.
I'm going to look it up.
It was everybody in the state of Texas, I believe, plus Arkansas.
And then Arkansas. Yeah, I was like, I'm just confirming it. Baylor and SMU. There you go. So, an old Southwest Conference rivalry in the state of Texas. This is Big 12 versus ACC now. SMU, a 2.5-point favorite at home, coming off of an opening win. Baylor coming off of an opening loss at home to Auburn. Who do you like in Dallas?
Yeah, Baptist versus Methodist, tale as old as time. This one's going to be good. I think that Baylor really showed me something against Auburn. I think that they were competitive, and there were moments where you saw Sawyer Robertson really light up Auburn secondary. Those 3 touchdown passes in week 1. Kelvin Jennings had a great year last year. Obviously, took this team to the playoff at SMU. Week 1, pretty good day, nothing crazy, but I'm interested to see what this is more of a even matchup. Obviously, the 2.5-point spread would indicate that as well. Who's going to bounce? Is Baylor going to bounce back and even this up? I like SMU in the game. The 2.5-point spread isn't entirely crazy. It's, something that just a field goal wins it. So I'm not necessarily treating this like a pick 'em, but, very few games are won by 1 or 2 points. So I do feel good about a 3-point victory for SMU. I think that they are in a better position in this one, being at home. And so I'm just going to go SMU straight up, but they're going to cover. I think they win this game probably by a touchdown. 2.5 points, I'll lay that easy.
I do want to mention you went 1-3 last week. I went 2-2. That brings us both to 2-3 on the season. 40% against the spread. It's early. You get a 3-1 week and you're back above 500. So rooting for that. Yeah, I'm also going SMU here. I did not walk away impressed with Baylor last week. In fact, my red flags went up with, run defense looks bad. And again, this is still after 1 week. You're trying to use priors to. Auburn did not feel the need to throw the ball in that game, which is why I walked away with still questions of how is Jackson Arnold fixed, because they just absolutely had no reason to throw the ball, and they've got elite weapons on the outside. So they just didn't feel the need to do that to win. They were able to run at will. Last year, Baylor's pass defense was the worst part of their defense. And so I just, my red flag's up wondering what Kevin Jennings is going to do to this defense this week. I actually like SMU by more than a touchdown in this game at home, by a touchdown or more. So I'll lay the 2.5 pretty easily here. Yeah, I like SMU like 34, 27, 24, somewhere in there. I think they're going to score some points like Auburn did in this game. So give me the Stings to get it done against Baylor. For a team that we thought could compete in the Big 12, I know neither one of these would be conference losses, but to start 0-2, you hope that you can get some momentums, because I do think they can compete in the Big 12 still for Baylor. Let's go to Ames, Iowa, the Cyhawk game. Iowa State favored by 3 in this game against Iowa. Daniel, who do you like in the Cyhawk?
Yeah, we know this one always gets weird. This one's not, one to be taken lightly. There's never an easy answer here. I don't think. Both these teams know each other really well, and I think they play tight in this game. Impressive win last week for Iowa, where they actually scored some points. It actually, felt like they have an offensive pulse. That being said, I've said for a while that I think Rocco Becht is the best quarterback in the Big 12. I think that he's the best quarterback in this game. 5 touchdowns on the year already through the air. And then, I think that the quarterback run game is going to be a big deal as well for Iowa State. I like the weapons that they have, and they're at home. It is the big noon kickoff. So I'm going to lean Iowa State. It's a 3-point game, or a 3-point line. I think they win this by. I would say they cover. I think they're gonna, 4 to 6 points win this game. They're not going to run away with it, I don't think, because of just the weirdness around it. But I feel comfortable laying the points with Iowa State. I think they come out on top.
Daniel, this game, I look at it and am tempted to just take the points, like just blindly. Whoever's the underdog, take the points. Since Matt Campbell got to Iowa State, his first year they lost by 40. It was 43-3. Since then, the margins, whether win or lose, have been 3, 10, 1, 10, 3, 7, 1. So this has been a close game consistently for the last, 7, 8 games. So like that's where I'm tempted to just like rivalry game, take the points. The away team has won the last 3 matchups in this rivalry. So again, Iowa on the road, they on paper are the more physical team, but I'm with you. I am laying the points with Iowa State here. It comes down to like what can you count on, and I can count on Iowa's defense being good, but Iowa State's is also good. Like both teams have a good defense, so I do like an under. Like last year, I think this game was 20-19, somewhere in there, and I think both defenses are going to have advantages over the offenses, but again, what can I count on? And I cannot count on Iowa's offense. So Iowa State's offense much more reliable to get it done. So the 3 points does scare me in this game because like I think they can win this game by 1 and they'll be thrilled. But I will lay the point and say that Rocco Beck in this offense gets him by a field goal. Worst case, we push here. Lay the points. Give me Iowa State in the Cy-Hawk game. I like him I'm being optimistic here, like 17-10. Like 27 total points, like take the under. They get it done late. It's it's 10-10 for like the whole game, and then a late touchdown, they win. Lay the points with Iowa State. Daniel, a renewal of a rivalry, the border war between Missouri and Kansas, out of conference game. Again, this was a Big 8 game back in the day when they shared the same conference. Missouri and Kansas traveling to Como. Missouri and Drinkwitz a 6.5 point favorite. Who do you like in Columbia?
Yeah, I didn't give this in the last one. I should have, just as far as Iowa State having played 2 games already because of the week 0, and then, against Iowa only having 1 game. Similar thing here. Kansas played a week 0 game and then played last week, so they've got 2 games under their belt. I do see that as an advantage. So I think that Iowa State had that advantage for the Cy-Hawk game. In this one, I think Kansas has that advantage of a couple of games of eval versus Missouri only having the Central Arkansas game under their belt. Now, I do think that Missouri feels good about Bo Pribula. I need to learn how to say that since I'm probably going to be saying it a bunch this year. Pribula. He looked great. Obviously, Central Arkansas. SEC Shorts called them the Ohio State of the Atlantic Sun, which I thought was a hilarious line. They looked dominant on both sides of the ball. Of course, you got to look at the opponent. But a lot of I'll say this, when you play a team like that, you want to see the guys you expect to play well to be the ones making the plays in those games. If that kind of makes sense, you don't want to have, it look like, hey, we have the wrong guy starting, or we expect too much from this guy and this other guy looked better. You don't want any of those questions. I feel like they've got some alphas. They've got some guys on that defensive line that can play. Pribula looked good at quarterback. They've got some good receivers. I think some guys stepping into roles that maybe they didn't have last year. I think you're kind of getting some of that picture. Missouri's the better team. Jalen Daniels in his 12th year of college football at Kansas is electric, and he's got 7 touchdowns on the young season so far. I am very tempted to just straight up take points and just see what happens, because I do weigh heavily on having multiple games early in the season like this where you can, know your team a little bit better. But I will cede that for a much more talented Missouri team. I'm not going to overthink this. This is less than a touchdown. If this was 7.5 points where I had to give up more than a touchdown, I really do think I'd be going the other way with this with Kansas. But I'm going to go Missouri. I think Missouri minus the points is the right play on here. I think all you have to lay is a touchdown. Give me that one all day. And yeah, I think Pribula is kind of going to put his name out there as one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC as the season progresses, because he's very much good, through the air and on the ground. So excited to see kind of what the result of this one is and this rivalry renewed.
Same thing, Daniel, in the last one where I'm like, rivalry game, tempted to take the points with the road team. Let me rephrase that. I am going to take the points with the road team here. I'm going to take Kansas. Good on good is going to be the Kansas offense against the Missouri defense. It's going to be good on good in this game. The mid on mid is going to be the Kansas defense against the Missouri offense. Not bad, but mid. To me, as I dive into some advanced stats here, like it seems like a game that should be like a 4.5 to 5.5 point spread. And I know we're like playing with a point here potentially, but it's enough to make me want to take the points in a game that I do feel like could go either way here. But no result's going to surprise me. I think Kansas blowing out Missouri would surprise me. I could see Missouri blowing out Kansas, but I can't see Kansas going on the road and winning this game or keeping it close. Like we blink and it's 27-24 Missouri. And maybe even it was like a pretty good win and Kansas scored late to bring it back within 3. That seems like the kind of game script for me. So 6.5 points. I think Missouri wins the game, but I am going to take the points with Kansas here. And I'm with you on they've had a couple games to get the offense rolling. Missouri was messing around playing 2 quarterbacks last game. One of them got hurt. Now they got to roll with Pribula because Sam Horn got hurt. So give me the points here. I think Missouri wins, but I think Kansas covers in the border war. Very glad this game is back and on a college campus. Daniel, the big one for week 2. And look, there's several. Week 2 just seems like an underrated Saturday where it's like, yeah, there's like one headliner game, and there's a few where, what if we just have upsets all over the place? Unranked teams beating ranked teams, because there's only one ranked on ranked matchup, and that's Oklahoma and Michigan. Oklahoma, a 5.5 point favorite. Brent Venables goes out and brings over the whole OC QB combo. They had an elite defense last year, but could not find a pulse on offense. Michigan last year, rebuilding year after a championship. The whole coaching staff leaves. The defense was very good last year. They still beat Ohio State. The NCAA hammer comes down, not really, on Michigan. We're past all that. They start Bryce Underwood last week. They now got to go on the road to Oklahoma. Should be a really good game. Oklahoma, a 5.5 point favorite. Daniel, who do you like in Norman?
Yeah, this one, man, dude, does it not? I don't know. For me, this game would feel like an upset if Oklahoma won. Just by recent success. Obviously, last year was bad for Michigan, but, them winning the championship 2 years ago and then just their success before that, Oklahoma kind of in somewhat of a downward spiral is looking for that resurgence. I know Oklahoma's at home, but that's just kind of the vibe I get. If Michigan were to win this game, I feel like a lot of people would say, oh yeah, it's Michigan. Michigan should win these kinds of games. And then I feel like the opposite for Oklahoma. If Oklahoma won, I wouldn't put rushing the field past them. Not that it's it's not a top 5 Michigan team right now. Michigan, we talked about them in their XPR, how they dropped 8 points, eight slots after their win against New Mexico State or New Mexico, whatever, the Lobos. They at times looked impressive, and then at other times looked like they just were, trying some things out. You start to wonder, were they playing with their food a little bit to try to figure out more of their team? Were they just getting, having bad luck, or were they getting blown off the ball a little bit? Justice Haynes looked really impressive, 3 touchdowns. Bryce Underwood, he's going to be the headliner. The thing that jumped out to me when I had this game on a secondary screen, obviously I was watching LSU Clemson primary. I did go back and watch some highlights as well to kind of get more of the vibe. Bryce Underwood didn't really look like a freshman. He looks, and not just physically, I meant his poise. He operationally, he didn't look frantic at any moment. He just looked like he belonged. And that's a big deal. The other players around you are going to get that vibe too. And if you look like you belong, not just physically, but like, your presence, I think that's going to go a long way. I'm going to be, some would say, a coward. I'm going to middle this one. I think Oklahoma wins it at home, but I am taking these points because I think that people are going to sleep on Michigan a little bit. I think Michigan's going to lead for most of this game, and it's going to take kind of a comeback by Oklahoma. One of my famous there's going to be a lead into the second half games, but Oklahoma will come back and win this one late. They'll keep it close. It'll be maybe a 3-point win. John Mateer, I think they can get it done. But I like Michigan, man. I like them to come in there and shock some people and have a lead and be running the ball and doing what they like to do and really make Oklahoma beat them. Michigan's not scared, even though they had a bad year last year. They have been in these big games much more recently than Oklahoma has, and they've come out on top. So it may be a DNA trait. So give me Michigan with the points, Oklahoma in the win.
I love it. Yeah, I agree in that Bryce Underwood looked like he belonged last week, right? Like he did not like out of place. He showed flashes of why he was the number 1 overall recruit in the country. And for Michigan's future, I think like starting him this year to get him the experience. Best case, he takes you to playoff like I picked. And I told you, after we picked the playoff, that was the team I felt worst about. And, worst case, he gets a year of starting experience to make a playoff run the next 2 years as a freshman. High ceiling. Look, you pay that much for a player. Probably should start him. I love that played into it. But he looked the part last week as a starting quarterback. I don't love what I saw from Michigan's defense last week. And that's what concerns me, is playing a far inferior opponent. Like the defense did not look up to Michigan's standard, especially on the defensive line, which, again, if you go back and listen to our kind of, all right, now that we've picked everything, what do you feel bad about? I circled the Michigan defensive line and said, I don't think that's going to happen. That Michigan defensive line, not great things coming out of camp. That carried over into week 1. I know it's an inferior opponent. Maybe they all of a sudden they're going to Oklahoma and they look like world beaters, but John Mateer looked really good in week 1, and I've been skeptical of this. One QB and OC is just going to fix the Oklahoma offensive problems from last year, and they also had 5 receivers get hurt, so it's not just that, but I'm still skeptical of they're going to get a new QB and OC and all of a sudden go win 10 games after going 6-6. But he looked really good in his first start. John Mateer, JC Dub, so a veteran QB against a defense that didn't look great last week. I don't love Michigan's chances in this spot in week 2. I think if this game was being played in week 9, we could have a different conversation. But week 2, Oklahoma's offense looked ready to roll against a Michigan defense I have a lot of concerns about. Freshman QB on the road against an elite defense as well. Oklahoma's defense was phenomenal last year. They looked the part in week 1 as well. I like Oklahoma to win in a low-scoring game, like 27-20. So I think they cover the 5.5. Give me the Sooners here in week 2. Daniel, we're starting to get some data on these games. So the more games we get, the more data I get to sift through. Even this week's pretty hard because you got a lot of priors baked into it too. But to recap for our picks, we're both on SMU laying the points. We're both on Iowa State laying the points. I'm taking the points with Kansas. You're laying them with Missouri. We both think Missouri wins that game. We both think Oklahoma wins. I'm laying the points of 5.5. You're taking the points with Michigan. I think it's a closer game. And that, Daniel, any parting thoughts?
Dude, just excited. These are the types of weeks that people go into saying, well, we had that great opening week. There's not really any great ranked matchups. There will be upsets that we are not expecting. Ole Miss, be on alert with Kentucky. It happened last year. Just keep an eye out, man. There's going to be a storyline pop up this week that somebody is going to be on the ropes with a team they should not be on the ropes with. And it's going to change the scope of perhaps this season. The chaos is our friend in college football. So let's just enjoy the ride.
Daniel, I'm looking, I'm like, which team should be on highest upset alert for Saturday? Illinois, I've got on, red hot upset alert. I'm not saying this facetiously. Indiana, prove to me this is more than a year 1 thing. 34.5 points. Go beat KSU by 40. Oh, goodness. I'm not concerned about Oregon. You hit the nail. Ole Miss, 10.5.
It's just a stinker, dude. It's a stinker.
10.5 seems like an easy
That's an
lock.
easy lay if you just are looking at facts and talent. Dude,
Florida.
Just watch out, man.
Dude, again, we didn't even mention Arizona State only laying 6.5 at Mississippi State, which they had to come back to beat last year. Mississippi State had a 17-0 lead in that game last year.
This one's in Stark Vegas, dude. You got to go there. as Greg McElroy would say, clanger.
We're going to be talking about
Cowbells
at
will be
least
out.
one big upset.
Yeah.
This time next week. So excited to watch it. Be sure to follow us at the Extra Point Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Karnes with a K. That'll do it for this edition of the Extra Point. He is Daniel. I am Jacob. See ya.